Today we're going to be talking about inventory counts, specifically the scheduled inventory counts that you might do at the end of the year. Some customers might even do these every quarter, maybe twice a year. There's really no limit as to the amount of times that you can do a scheduled inventory count. And we're just here to go through the process and look at how you can perform the count with the scanning, and then how you can go through the reconciliation process. So the very first step is to go to the inventory menu, and we're going to click Scheduled Inventory Counts. As you can see, I have a few inventory counts from the past. We're going to create a new scheduled inventory count by clicking that option just over here in the right-hand menu. And I'm going to do a test inventory count for my New York City location. Of course, I'm in a test system, so I don't actually have a New York City location or any physical inventory, but I do have the barcode set up so we can go through and at least go through the process as if I actually had a real physical location with real gear. So let's just call it New York City Test 2015. And you can do a separate inventory count for each location. In fact, you're required to do a separate inventory count for each location because you can only choose one of your business locations per inventory count. So in this case, I'm going to choose my New York City location. Of course, if you only have one business location and you only operate from one warehouse, then you'll just create the single inventory count for that one warehouse. The opening date is going to be when this scheduled inventory count is available to go in and start scanning. And so let's say that it is yesterday, just so it will be available to me. But maybe you don't want to start till next week, so you could put the 14th or any date in the future. But since I want access to this now, I'm going to put yesterday's date. And then the closing date is just kind of a general date of when you should be done with that count. We looked at the location already, and your last two options are number one, do you want this inventory count to expect decommissioned units? You could say yes or no, and the little pop-up just says this option determines whether decommissioned units should be expected for counting. So if you have any items that are decommissioned in your system and you select yes on this, then this inventory count will expect you to count those. And same with out of commission. You can have this inventory count expect anything that you have marked as out of commission. The scenario there might be you still want to physically count everything you own, even though some of it might be decommissioned and not being used anymore, or out of commission and needing to be repaired or something like that. And so in this example, let's just choose yes for expect out of commission items. And after you've filled in all the details, just click add. And that will open up the inventory count info page here. And you can change any of the information. We're not going to close or mark as reconciled just yet. We'll show how we can do this after we actually perform the count. But if you do need to change any of these details, you can do that from here. And you can always just go back to the inventory menu, click Scheduled Inventory Counts, and double click on that count to open up this page. Now, the way that you can get to the actual scanning screen, where you can go and start scanning all of the inventory that you currently have in your warehouse, go to the warehouse menu, and then you'll see under current counts, the inventory count that you just set up. And I believe this will only be available after the opening date. So if you don't see it, then you either need to change the date or just wait until that date comes. When I click on the inventory count, it's going to bring me to the warehouse scanning screen that you're probably used to from the prep screen and the return screen and subrental screens and all of those. And essentially, we're just going to do the same thing here, except we don't really have a list of things that we're supposed to scan. We're just scanning anything and everything that is currently sitting in this New York City warehouse. And so I have a cheat sheet set up right now with some barcodes, and I'm just going to start scanning them as if I actually have this inventory in my possession. And I'm not going to do a ton of gear right now just because that would be very time consuming. In fact, some of you, this inventory count could take several days, if not even a week or two. But I just want to scan a few different types of items, so I'm scanning some serialized items first. Now I want to scan some non-serialized items. And that works just the same way, where you get the non-serialized prompt. You'll just enter how many you've counted. This is my VGA 10. I have 25. And keep in mind that right now, we're scanning only things that are currently in the warehouse. In this business, it's probably difficult to actually have all of your gear under the roof at one time. And so we've built in some things that will help you to reconcile items that are out on jobs without having to scan it here on this scan screen. So if you have anything that's out on a job, you're not going to scan it here. You're only going to be scanning things that are physically in the warehouse. And for non-serialized, you're only going to enter the actual quantity that you currently have in your warehouse. So again, I'm going to do on the 25 footers, I have 20. And you'll also notice the progress bar moving up as I go. Mine's up pretty far already just because in my New York City location, I really don't have that much gear. I've probably only put about 15 or 20 items in there. So yours, once you start scanning, it will probably progress a lot slower. And I'll also mention that sometimes you might make a mistake that is known to happen when you're scanning, especially when you're doing non-serialized items. So for example, if I type in for my XLR 5-footers, I'm supposed to have 34, but let's say that I accidentally hit the extra 5 and I didn't really catch it. And what you'll see is that the percentage complete goes up quite a bit. And that's just because Flex is saying, oh, well, he scanned in 350 something of an item when he only has, 20 or 30, and so the percentage goes up quite a bit. You can undo your last scan if you do make a mistake like that. And at the same time, if you make a mistake like that and you don't have the undo last scan available to you, then there's ways that you can rectify that when we're in the reconciliation process. One question that I see in the chat room right now, when we're doing a count, does it scan into that warehouse? And I believe the answer is yes. I did a little bit of testing earlier where I would scan something that was still scanned out on a job, and when I scanned it in this inventory count, then it returned it back to the current location warehouse that I was in. So let's go back to the scanning process here. Let's do... we'll get back to that XLR 5-footer in just a minute. But let's go back to scanning some more of my gear. There's a Retina MacBook. Let's do an amp rack. And I wanted to do this amp rack to show you how you need to scan items that are inside of a container or a package. So right now I have this amp rack built as a container with 2 amplifiers inside of it, and they're even marked as permanent. But when you're doing an inventory count, it doesn't work like you're scanning out. Normally when I would scan out, it would also scan both of the amplifiers. In this scenario, I have to scan the amp rack itself and the contents inside of it. So I have to open up the amp rack and scan each amplifier as well. You don't necessarily want to assume that the things that are inside of the amp rack, at least how they're represented in Flex and what you've scanned into it within Flex. When you're doing this inventory count, you don't want to assume that what is currently inside of this amp rack is what is actually inside of it. 99% of the time it probably is, but that 1% of the time where you might have a mistake and the items that are scanned into this amp rack might not be the correct ones, then that could really throw off your inventory count. And so that's why we have you scan each item individually, even if they are contents and marked as permanent. So let's do a few more. We're going to scan some Mackie speakers. You also notice that you have a last known location. Most of them are probably just going to say your warehouse, because if you are using Flex correctly and you're scanning all of the gear in as it comes back from a job, then anything that's sitting in your warehouse should be its last known location as in the warehouse. If you see something its last known location was a job, then like I said earlier, that gear is just going to scan back into that warehouse. The last known location was just letting you know that it was scanned out to something else besides the warehouse. Let's get back to our XLR cable. I'm going to do my 5 footers. I have 34. My 10 footers I have 47. Uh, 25 footers I have 54. And again, we're just going through all these different types of inventory so that you can see exactly how they work when we get to the reconciliation. So I wanted to have a nice mix of serialized and non-serialized items. Let's do another where we have a case. So we have the case for the VL3500 lights. But again, even if I have lights scanned into them within Flex as a container, I still have to scan each of the lights that are inside of the containers as well. And then if I had safety cables or anything else, any sort of adapter in that case, I would have to scan those as well. Anything that you have represented in your inventory. So let's finish up. I only have about 4 more items left. There's some stage decks I'll scan. And there are a few more items that I do have, some of which are on a job, and then some of which I actually currently have in the warehouse, but I just didn't scan them because I want to show you a few of the ways that you can reconcile different things that are either out on a job or are actually in the warehouse and just didn't get scanned. So in terms of my scanning, I'm going to call this complete. Like I said, I still have a few things that I didn't scan, but I'm going to say that I'm done with this for now. I can close that window. And then I would go back to my inventory menu, scheduled inventory counts, and reopen the count if you didn't have it open already, and click close. So what this is going to do is it's going to do a closeout count, as you can see. For some of you, this might take quite a while. If you have a lot of inventory in your system, this could take several minutes, possibly even up to 20, 30 minutes. In my system, I only have a little bit of inventory, so if I click refresh, it's probably already done, as you can see. Yeah, so for a lot of you, it might take a little bit longer because you have a lot more inventory. And basically what that process is doing is just closing out the count, building the reconciliation sheet. So it's taking all of the scans that you did on the current scan, or on the current count, and then it's looking at all of the other gear that's supposed to be in that warehouse, and it's building the reconciliation sheet so that you can look and see what you scanned and what you didn't scan, so you can go through the reconciliation process. As you can see, we're in the pending reconciliation status. And so what I'll do is go back to my main page for scheduled inventory counts. And one more time, that's just on the inventory menu, click scheduled inventory counts. And what you'll see now is that there is an option to go reconcile this count. So you'll click on that option. And this brings you to the reconciliation screen. We've made a few improvements to this screen. If you did this last year, you might notice a few new options here. In the past, the entire reconciliation sheet would load just right when you open this page. And for people that had a larger inventory, this was taking quite a while. So a few things that we did was, number one, we made it possible to have it either include or not include the return date for each item, and also include or not include the last known location. These are the two things that would take up the most processing power. And so if if we have these checked and then click all to load all of the items on this reconciliation sheet, it would take a little bit longer. If I click all to load all right now, for me it's probably only going to take a few seconds. And there's everything that I had in the warehouse, and it's showing me the things that I scanned as well. But let me show you if I choose that. Again, for me, it's probably not taking quite as long just because I have so little inventory. But for those of you that have a larger inventory, that might take a little bit longer. We also have the option to show only unreconciled items. So that's what it's showing right now, is things that I did not scan or things that didn't have the full quantities counted. So for example, I was expected to have 50 of these 10-foot XLRs, but I only counted 47, so I still need to reconcile that in some way. Or I could show things that have been reconciled. So these are things that I counted, and they have their full quantity there. And you can see they come with a little green check mark. These are non-serialized items, and so that's why you see the green check mark right here on the front. For serialized items, you'll just have to drill down with the arrow, and it will show you exactly the barcodes that belong to that serialized item, and will show whether or not those have been reconciled. Or I could show all. I personally like showing all just so I could see everything at once. So for example, I can see that I did count my 0.8 lenses, and those are already reconciled. But I didn't scan these Barco 1.6 to 2.0 lenses. And that's what this little icon means, is that this still needs to be reconciled. The last thing that you can do to kind of save some processing power to make it load a little bit faster for you, instead of loading all, then you could just search for a specific group. So say, for example, you have a very large video inventory, and you just want to reconcile your video inventory right now. So you could type in video, and that would pull up everything in just your video group. And I believe you can also do this for child groups. So if I were to go and search for cable, and I might have to do it. I could be wrong about that, but you can at least do your parent groups, just so you're only loading specific items instead of your entire inventory. But again, since I don't have a very large inventory, then I'm just going to load all of it. Let's start going through the reconciliation process now so that you can see exactly what that is and how to reconcile the items that you did not count. Let's start from the very top. So you can see that we already scanned and therefore reconciled these 0.8 lenses. So you can see the barcode, the quantity expected, the quantity that I scanned, and it's showing its last known location, which was just the warehouse. If we go down to our other lenses, we can see the barcode, quantity expected was 1, but I scanned 0. These were due back a few days ago, and they were out on this job. So at this point, I could click on the job, and it's probably going to bring me to the manifest. And if it was a big job, I could look at all the other items. I could even go to the return screen and see if other things got returned. But for this particular job, we only sent out the 2 lenses, and they did not get returned. And so maybe at this point I would make a few phone calls, maybe call the account manager for that job, maybe call the client and see why we don't have the lenses there. Maybe even call the warehouse and just ask, double check that they actually didn't return. Let's say in this example that they didn't return and nobody knows where they are. So what we can do is click on the little reconcile icon, this little triangle icon here. And it's going to give me a couple options. Number 1, I could mark this as presumed missing. 2, I could delete the item You probably won't use that quite as often, but if there is a situation where you might need to just remove it entirely from your inventory just because you don't own it or it doesn't exist anymore, then you could delete it. Or you could mark it as accounted for. And basically all this is going to do is say, okay, you know where this is, so we're not going to do anything. If I click mark accounted for, then it's still going to be scanned out to this job. It's not going to return it to my warehouse. It's just going to stay scanned out on the current job that it's on. We'll look at another example of this in just a minute, but this one we actually want to do mark as presumed missing. Because like I said, nobody really knows where this item is. We've called the client, we've called the warehouse manager, we can't find it. So I mark that as presumed missing. Let's do the other one as well. Mark as presumed missing, click reconcile, and that just gives me a notification that the serial number was marked as presumed missing, and gives me a check mark letting me know that that's been done. In fact, let's go look at, if we click on the barcode for these items now, then you can see that it is in fact marked as presumed missing, and its last known location was that job. And just in case you don't know, if you mark something as presumed missing, that actually will reduce your quantity, your allocated quantity for that warehouse. So since I marked both of them as presumed missing, my New York City location no longer has these lenses. And it would appear on my presumed missing report and on the unreturned items by manifest report for the manifest that they weren't returned from. Let's go back to our reconciliation sheet and keep going down the list. So our barcode projectors, both of those were counted, so those look fine. It looks like on our VGA cables, we counted the actual amount that was expected, so all of those are checked as reconciled as well. In fact, let's jump down really quick as long as we're talking about non-serialized items. Let's look at our XLR cable. Because notice, they were expecting, or the system was expecting a certain amount, but on each of these four, I did not hit that expected amount. And so I still have the reconciliation button here. So let's click that and see what our options are. You're going to see a little bit of a different screen here. Right here, it's going to say, do you want to adjust the quantities or just mark as accounted for? If I do mark as accounted for, then what it's going to do is just keep the current quantities that I have in my system right now. And let me show you exactly what that means. So we're looking at our XLR10. So let's, in fact, I might be able to open it from here. Oh, no, I can't. So let's find my XLR10 over here. And I do only have 47 out of 50. I might have some out on jobs, but again, it doesn't really matter because anything that's out on a job, I'm not going to count. And I'll just scan it back in when it comes back from the job. And so if I go back to my reconcile and I say mark accounted for, it reconciles it, but let's refresh my quantity. Essentially nothing happens. And so in this sense, I'm kind of assuming that I have 3 more that are out on jobs that I know are out and will be coming back. So I don't want to change my second number or my allocated quantity because I know I still own 50. I just need to return 3 from a job that's still out. So that's why I might use the mark accounted for in that scenario. Let's try one, maybe this 100-footer, where I don't have anything out or anything that's still out on a job. So when I go to the reconcile sheet, I want to adjust the quantities. And what you have to do here is take your quantity counted, because whatever you counted is now the amount that you own. And you would have to come over here and actually change your allocated quantity, which is the second number, or the quantity that you own. Make sure that reconciliation method is adjust quantities, then click Reconcile. And what happens there, if we open up my 100-foot XLR, now it's 17 out of 17. And so those are just two different scenarios why you might use mark as accounted for or adjust quantities. For these other ones, let's just for time's sake do mark as accounted for, and we won't change the quantities. And then let's go back to the top here and finish up some of these other items. So for my MacBook Pro, you can see that I did count 1. That's reconciled. Notice that there's another check mark here. This one says quantity expected and quantity counted as 0. What this one is an item that is presumed missing already. So if you have something presumed missing from that warehouse, it will still show up on the reconcile sheet just as a 0 out of 0 to let you know that there is something that's presumed missing. That's its last known location, but it's technically considered as reconciled just because you don't really know where it is. Excuse me. So you don't really know where it is, and you've already tried to find it, so technically it's reconciled because you know what its status is. These other two, notice, I still have the reconcile icon. They were expecting 1. Quantity counted was 0. And this one, the return date isn't for a few days. It's out on a job. So this is a serialized item that we can go to reconcile and just say it's marked as accounted for. And again, remember, this isn't going to return it or do anything else to the item. All that we're doing with that is saying we know where it is and it's accounted for, and we expect it to return from this job in a few days. And just to show you what that looks like, if we go to our 15-inch Retina, you can see I still only have 1 out of 3 in my New York City. And the 2 that I just marked as accounted for are still out on the MacBook rental job. Let's continue with the reconciliation. We'll go to our amplifiers. These ones should all be done because remember we scanned the amplifier rack itself and then we scanned each of the amplifiers. And it looks like we have another one here. One of our Mackie 450 speakers. We were expecting 1, this one here, when we didn't count any. So we could click on that and start doing a little detective work and see where it might be. Technically it's here in the warehouse. I could look at the scan log. It was returned earlier today. So I could just go verify with whoever did the count for this and say, hey, this is in the warehouse and I see it sitting here. Ask them why they didn't scan it. And then at that point I could just go in and say, mark it as accounted for. I think the last items here should be pretty straightforward. We do have the 4 that we scanned, and then I also have a few that are out of commission. And I didn't count those ones. So remember, usually if I said expect out of commission yes, I would have gone to each of these and actually scanned them, even though they're out of commission. When you do that on the count screen, it's going to pop up a little window that asks, do you want to take this out of commission? And you could say yes or no. Typically, you'd probably say no, unless you are removing it from out of commission. It still needs to be reconciled, though, and so these ones I would just say mark as accounted for. And again, just like we did with the MacBook computers, this really isn't doing anything to the item. It's still going to be marked as out of commission. All I'm saying is that I know where it is, and I want to get that green check mark so that when I print my shrink report for this inventory count, then this will not show up as something that is missing. Same with our Vari-Lite cases, those are fine. And then our stage deck, same kind of scenario here where we have a few that we didn't count. We could click on the barcode and see where they're supposed to be. And this might just be another situation where technically they were returned, but they just didn't get scanned in the count. So I could just say that they're marked as accounted for. And so technically this reconciliation is done. What I could do at that point is come over, click Mark Reconciled, and that just puts it into a reconciled status. So if I reload, this is just saying it's closed and it has been reconciled. I could print a shrink report for this inventory count. And basically what this is just a nice sheet that will show you everything that didn't get its expected quantity. And then what I did. So this one didn't get its expected quantity, but I marked it as accounted for, so we're good to go. This one you can see I did a quantity adjustment. These ones you could see I marked as presumed missing. So the shrink report just gives you all the information of what you did during the reconciliation process. Let's look at a couple of different scenarios that might pop up as you're doing an inventory count. So number one, we can always mark as unreconciled. And you can go back to the reconcile sheet. And you're basically just leaving off starting where you left off. So if you forgot to reconcile something, and then you went and marked it as reconciled, you can always just go back and unreconcile it and reopen the sheet. Additionally, you could reopen the entire count if you forgot to scan some stuff. And I can go back to my current counts and start scanning some more here. One question I was seeing is what happens if you're scanning more than what Flex is expecting. So let's really quick create a new item for maybe XLR 50. And let's just say that I own in my New York City location, or I have 20 in my warehouse, and I own 20. So all of them are in the warehouse. But let's say that I somehow inherited some, maybe accidentally took some from another job site, from another company. And so when you actually do your count in the warehouse, maybe you have 25. So let's go back to the actual count. We're going to type in the barcode for my 50-foot XLR. And we're going to say 25. I could go back, reopen this tab of my inventory count and close it again because now I'm done. It's going to go through that close count process again. But again, mine's really quick. And then I would go back to the reconcile screen for that count. And you can see that everything is still the same. Everything that I reconciled still has its green check marks, so nothing got reset. But you will see the new item that I added and then scanned. And what happens here is that if you count more than what is expected, Flex isn't necessarily going to stop you because a lot of times that might actually happen. Maybe, like I said, you've accumulated a few more of these non-serialized items, and so we didn't want Flex to actually stop you from scanning more. We just wanted to give you a warning that you scanned more than what was expected. So you get that yellow highlight, and technically it is considered reconciled just because you've counted at least the quantity expected. And at this point, it would just be a matter of going back to that item and changing the quantities by hand. When you print the shrink report, then you could probably see all that information. So you can go through and see, oh, well, this one I had more than was expected. So you'll just go back, open that item, and change the quantities. And then after I've reconciled that, I can click Mark Reconciled again. And this inventory count is done. A couple last things I'll mention. Clicking the Mark Reconciled button, all that's really doing is just changing the status. And the status doesn't affect any of the items that were in this inventory count. So for example, if I did an entire inventory count and then I went and only half reconciled on the reconciled sheet, and then I clicked Mark Reconciled, that doesn't mean that it's going to automatically reconcile every single item that's on that list. All that does is just put it into that reconciled status, just so you have a visual to know if you've reconciled it, yes or no. If you still need to finish the reconciliation process, you'll just mark it as unreconciled, then come back here and you can reopen and finish the reconcile process. So again, just to be clear, when you click Mark Reconciled, that doesn't mean that anything on this reconcile worksheet is going to automatically get a green check mark. That's not going to happen. The only way you can get a green check mark on an item is if you've scanned the complete quantity that you were expecting, or if you click the triangle icon and reconcile it manually. So all I'm doing when I click that is just changing the status so that I know whether or not it's been reconciled. And so that's the general process of the inventory count. If you do have any questions about inventory counts, we invite you to visit our forum, ask some questions there, and get some advice from people that have been through this. If you're experiencing any issues with your inventory counts, any issues that are technical in nature, then we ask that you email support@flexrentalsolutions.com and we can help you out there.